Have you ever found yourself replaying a single unfinished conversation in your head over and over again? Maybe someone said half a sentence and stopped, leaving you wondering what they really meant. Or maybe you left an email unanswered, a task half done, or a story interrupted midway. Hours or even days later, your mind keeps circling back, as if refusing to let it go. Why does this happen? Why does the brain latch onto incomplete things so much harder than the things we've fully finished? This video is about that mysterious phenomenon and how you can use it to your advantage instead of letting it drain your energy. Psychologists call it the Zeigarnik effect, named after Bluma Zeigarnik, a researcher in the early 20th century who noticed something peculiar while sitting in a cafe. She observed that waiters had no trouble remembering complicated orders until the orders were served. Once the bill was paid, they forgot instantly. The key difference was that unfinished tasks remained alive in the waiter's mind, while completed ones faded away. Zeigarnik tested this in experiments and found that people remember interrupted or incomplete tasks far better than completed ones. This is the foundation of what we can call the brain's search for closure. Your brain hates open loops. It craves completion. Imagine your mind as a puzzle board. Each unfinished thought, unresolved task, or dangling story is like a missing piece. Your attention is pulled toward the gap until it's filled. That's why cliffhangers in TV shows work so powerfully. You can't rest until you know what happens next, and the brain stores that tension as unfinished business. But this mental drive has a dual nature. On the one hand, it's incredibly useful. It's what keeps you motivated to finish projects, to tie up loose ends, to seek resolution. Without it, you might never feel the urge to finish anything. On the other hand, it can trap you. That's why you sometimes lie awake at night replaying unfinished conversations, or why a half-written report on your desk can feel heavier in your mind than the 10 tasks you've already completed. So why exactly does the brain do this? The answer lies in attention and memory. Your mind has limited cognitive resources, and it prioritizes what feels unresolved. Think of it as a mental alarm system. Incomplete tasks are flagged as urgent, and your brain keeps nudging you to return to them. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. If our ancestors started building a shelter or collecting food but left it incomplete, their survival could be at risk. So the brain developed a bias to keep unfinished things active in working memory. The problem is that in the modern world, not every open loop is a matter of survival, yet the brain treats it with the same urgency. That's why even a trivial unfinished email can gnaw at your focus. Now here's where it gets interesting. Researchers have found that simply starting a task, even if you don't finish it, can lock it into your memory and motivate you to come back. This is why students who begin working on an essay early, even just writing the first paragraph, are more likely to complete it later. The act of starting creates a mental hook, and the brain won't rest until it's tied off. You can think of it like planting a flag. The task now exists in your cognitive landscape, and your brain keeps circling back to it until it's done. But of course, the downside is when these open loops pile up and begin to weigh on you. An unfinished to-do list, a conversation left hanging, a decision postponed, they all compete for your attention, leaving you mentally exhausted. This is why sometimes you feel more tired from thinking about what you haven't done than from actually doing it. It's the mental equivalent of carrying too many browser tabs open. Each tab demands a little bit of memory and slows down the whole system. So what can you do about it? How do you harness the power of the brain's need for closure without letting it overwhelm you? The first strategy is what I call the micro-close. Even if you can't finish a task right now, you can give your brain a sense of closure by writing down a clear next step. For example, if you're working on a project and have to stop midway instead of leaving it hanging, jot down the exact point where you'll continue. Next, write introduction paragraph. By doing this, you trick your brain into believing the loop is structured, not chaotic, and the mental alarm quiets down. Another strategy is the 2-minute start. If a task feels intimidating, tell yourself you'll just begin for 2 minutes. Write the first line, make the first phone call, open the document. That tiny action is often enough to trigger the Zeigarnik effect, locking the task into your mental focus so you're pulled back to it later. Paradoxically, starting small helps you finish big. A third tool is conscious closure. Sometimes you have thoughts that can't be resolved immediately, like an argument or an unanswered question. In these cases, closure doesn't have to mean solving it. It can mean symbolically putting it aside. Try writing the unresolved thought on paper and explicitly telling yourself, "I'll revisit this tomorrow at 3 p.m. By scheduling it, you give your brain permission to let go in the present. This prevents it from haunting you in the background. But there's a deeper lesson here too. The search for closure reveals something fundamental about how we relate to life. We humans are uncomfortable with uncertainty. We want stories to have endings, problems to have solutions, feelings to have resolutions. Yet life itself is often messy, ambiguous, and incomplete. Sometimes you won't get the answer, the apology, or the ending you crave. In these moments, the real skill is learning to live with open loops without letting them consume you. This is where philosophy and psychology meet. In existentialist thought, the idea of incompleteness is central. Life itself is an open project, and trying to force closure on every aspect of it can lead to frustration. Instead, the challenge is to accept that some loops will remain open and to find peace within that uncertainty. In practical terms, this means choosing carefully which loops you close and which you let stay open. Not every unfinished story deserves your mental energy. Some conversations don't need a final word. Some projects don't need to be finished. By consciously deciding what to close and what to release, you reclaim your attention. Think of your mind like a desk. If it's cluttered with dozens of half-finished papers, you can't focus. But if you file away the ones that don't matter, suddenly the important work stands out. The same goes for your mental life. One more fascinating application of the Zeigarnik effect is in learning. Studies have shown that breaking up study sessions with deliberate pauses can actually improve retention. Why? Because when you stop in the middle of a task, your brain keeps processing it in the background, trying to resolve the unfinished loop. This is why sometimes you wake up with the solution to a problem you couldn't crack the night before. The brain hates incompleteness, so it keeps working while you rest. You can use this by studying in chunks and deliberately stopping before you feel finished. That lingering sense of incompletion keeps the material active in your mind, making it easier to recall later. Similarly, this principle is used in storytelling and marketing. Ever notice how movie trailers end on a dramatic note? Or how a mystery novel leaves clues unresolved until the last page? They're exploiting your brain's need for closure. Once the loop is open, you're compelled to seek resolution. By becoming aware of this, you can avoid being manipulated and instead use the effect consciously to your benefit. There's another layer to this phenomenon that's worth exploring: the emotional side of unfinished thoughts. Sometimes what keeps looping in your mind isn't just a task or a story, but an interaction that ended without resolution. A friend who left your message unread, a colleague who gave you vague feedback, or a partner who paused just before finishing a sentence. These small ruptures can consume your attention far beyond their real importance, because your brain treats them as open loops in need of closure. The lack of clarity leaves space for your imagination to fill in the blanks, and usually not in the most generous way. You might start constructing worst-case scenarios, replaying the situation with endless what-ifs. In other words, when closure is missing, the brain rushes to invent it. The problem is that the closure it creates may not match reality, leaving you more anxious than before. This is why consciously creating closure becomes a powerful mental skill. One way to do this is through narrative reframing. If your mind keeps replaying an unfinished story, deliberately give it an ending yourself. For example, if someone didn't finish a sentence, instead of letting your brain invent dozens of possible negative meanings, write out a few plausible neutral or positive endings. By doing this, you release the loop's grip. The brain wants a conclusion. You provide one, even if symbolic. Another practical approach is the mental shelf technique. When you feel caught in an unfinished thought spiral, imagine placing that thought on a shelf in your mind with a label that says, "To be revisited." This small visualization reassures your brain that the loop isn't lost, it's just parked. By externalizing it, you create a sense of control and reduce the mental tension of incompletion. The Zeigarnik effect also interacts with focus in surprising ways. If you have too many open loops competing for attention, your concentration shatters. But if you channel this effect wisely, it can actually enhance focus. Writers, for example, often stop their day mid-sentence so that the brain will be eager to return the next morning. Students can do the same by pausing study sessions in the middle of a problem, letting the unfinished loop keep the mind engaged until the next session. This transforms the brain's craving for closure into a motivational engine. But what about situations where closure simply isn't possible? Sometimes people leave without explanation, projects collapse, or answers never come. In these cases, seeking closure outside yourself can become an endless trap. The healthier option is to practice acceptance, learning to live with the discomfort of incompleteness. One way to practice this is through mindfulness. Instead of wrestling with the open loop, acknowledge its presence. Yes, This thought is unresolved, and that's okay. You shift from resisting the tension to observing it, and in that acceptance, the loop begins to loosen its grip. This is closely tied to philosophical traditions. In Zen Buddhism, there is an emphasis on embracing impermanence and incompleteness as fundamental to life. In Stoicism, there is the teaching that not everything is within your control, and peace comes from focusing on what you can act upon rather than what remains unfinished. These approaches don't erase the Zeigarnik effect, but they help you step outside it, seeing the loop without being trapped inside it. Another powerful exercise is closure through expression. Write a letter to the person or situation that left you hanging, even if you never send it. By putting your thoughts into words, you create a symbolic ending that satisfies your mind's craving for resolution. Many therapists use this technique because it allows the brain to treat the loop as closed, even without external completion. When you think about it, the search for closure is not just a quirk of the mind. It's a window into our deepest human need for coherence. We want our lives to make sense. We want stories to have arcs, relationships to have meaning, and experiences to fit into a narrative. Unfinished business threatens that sense of coherence, which is why it pulls so strongly on our attention. But here's the reframe. You don't have to fight this tendency. Instead, you can collaborate with it. By deliberately structuring your tasks, creating symbolic closures, and choosing which loops matter, you turn the brain's restless energy into a source of focus and momentum. Imagine how different your days would feel if, instead of being drained by hundreds of open mental tabs, you streamlined them into a few intentional loops that pulled you forward. Suddenly, your mind becomes less of a noisy cafe filled with half-finished orders and more like a workshop where each project is moving toward resolution with purpose. So the next time you catch yourself obsessing over an unfinished thought, don't just get frustrated with your brain. Recognize it as your mind's way of seeking coherence. Ask yourself, does this loop deserve my energy? Can I close it with a small step, or can I release it as something that doesn't need an ending right now? By doing this, you shift from being a passive prisoner of open loops to being an active manager of them. And over time, this mental discipline doesn't just give you more focus, it gives you more peace. Because peace isn't the absence of unfinished business, it's the ability to carry it lightly. If this exploration of the secret of unfinished thoughts helped you see your own mind in a new light, then share it with someone who might also be caught in their own loops. And don't forget to subscribe to Mind Unlocked, where we transform psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience into your toolkit for better thinking. Each video is another way to close the gap between confusion and clarity, and your next insight might be the missing piece your mind has been waiting for.